The gunshot echoed across the dusty plains, sending a flock of startled ravens into the pale blue sky as Clara Reynolds clutched the crumpled letter to her chest. 3 months ago, she had placed an advertisement for a husband in the matrimonial news, never imagining how drastically her life would change by the spring of 1883. Now, standing on the porch of her modest homestead just outside Truth or Consequences, New Mexico territory, she watched the approaching dust cloud with both anticipation and dread. "Miss Reynolds," a deep voice called out as a horse thundered toward her property. She recognized the rider instantly, Daniel Zachary, the town's deputy sheriff, a man whose piercing blue eyes had watched her with undisguised interest since she'd arrived last year to claim her uncle's abandoned property. Clara straightened her simple calico dress, her chestnut hair neatly pinned beneath a practical bonnet as Daniel dismounted in a fluid motion that spoke of years spent in the saddle. "Deputy Zachary," she acknowledged with a polite nod. "What brings you out this way?" His expression was grave as he removed his hat, revealing sun-bleached blonde hair. "I've come with news about the man you're set to marry tomorrow." Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. After nearly a year of backbreaking work trying to maintain her uncle's homestead alone, she had finally admitted defeat and advertised for a husband. The letters from Ethan McAllister had been thoughtful, intelligent, and promised the partnership she so desperately needed. "What about Mr. McAllister?" Her voice remained steady despite the anxiety building inside her. Daniel stepped closer, his spurs jingling softly. "I received a telegram from the sheriff in Dodge City this morning. The man coming to marry you is wanted for murder in Kansas." The words struck Clara like a physical blow. "There must be some mistake." "No mistake, Miss Reynolds. Ethan McAllister is wanted for killing a banker in cold blood during a robbery gone wrong. There's a $500 bounty on his head." Clara's fingers tightened around the letter. But his letters, were likely all fabricated. Daniel's voice softened with genuine concern. "He's arriving on tomorrow's stage expecting to marry a woman with property. I believe he's using you to disappear." Clara felt her knees weaken. The stage would arrive tomorrow at noon, and the wedding was planned for sunset. Pastor Williams would officiate, and the few friends she'd made in Truth or Consequences would bear witness. Everything was arranged, the small cake misses. Henderson had baked the new dress she'd sewn by candlelight for weeks. "I don't understand," she whispered, more to herself than to Daniel. "His letters were so sincere." "Men like McAllister are accomplished liars," Daniel said grimly. "I've seen his kind before." Clara moved to the rough-hewn bench on her porch and sank down, the implications washing over her. Without a husband, she would lose everything. The bank had made it clear they would foreclose on her property within the month without proof she could manage the mortgage payments. A single woman couldn't survive alone in this unforgiving territory. She had learned that harsh truth over the past year. "What am I to do?" she asked, hating the vulnerability in her voice. Daniel paced the length of the porch, his tall frame casting a long shadow in the late afternoon sun. "We could arrest him when he arrives. And then what becomes of me? Of this place?" Clara gestured to the modest cabin and the struggling vegetable garden she had planted. It wasn't much, but it was everything she had. Daniel stopped pacing and faced her directly. "There is another option," he said carefully, "one that might solve both problems." Clara looked up, noticing for the first time how the setting sun caught golden highlights in his beard. "What option? Marry me instead." The words hung between them, as startling as the gunshot that had disturbed the ravens earlier. "I beg your pardon." Clara rose to her feet, certain she had misheard. "I'm proposing marriage, Miss Reynolds." Daniel's expression remained serious, though a flush crept up his neck. "I've admired you since you arrived in Truth or Consequences. Your determination, your courage in facing this harsh land alone, it's remarkable." Clara stared at him in disbelief. "Deputy Zachary, this is hardly appropriate." "Daniel," he corrected, "and I disagree. It's entirely appropriate. You need a husband. I've been looking for a wife. I have steady employment and savings. I can help you keep this land, and we can build something worthwhile together." Clara shook her head, overwhelmed. "You can't simply propose marriage to a woman you barely know." Isn't that exactly what you were planning to do with McAllister? Daniel challenged gently. At least with me, you know I'm not a murderer. The logic of his argument silenced her momentarily. It was true she had been prepared to marry a stranger based on nothing more than a handful of letters and references she now knew were false. I need time to think, she finally said. Daniel nodded, replacing his hat. The stage arrives at noon tomorrow. McAllister will be on it, expecting to find a bride and a fresh start. I'll give you until morning to decide. As he mounted his horse, Clara called out, How do I know you're telling the truth about McAllister? Daniel's expression hardened. Because I buried his last victim, a young widow outside of Dodge City. He married her, claimed her property, then disappeared after her mysterious death. It took months to connect him to the murder. He paused. I won't let that happen again, Clara, not to you. With that, he touched the brim of his hat and rode away, leaving Clara standing on the porch with her future dissolving before her eyes. The night passed in a blur of anxiety. Clara paced her small cabin, reading and rereading Ethan McAllister's letters by lamplight. Were there signs she had missed? Some hint of the darkness Daniel claimed lurked behind the eloquent words. The man described himself as a former schoolteacher from Ohio who had come west seeking opportunity. His handwriting was neat, his thoughts well articulated. Had it all been a carefully constructed lie as dawn broke over the mountains, Clara made her decision. She couldn't risk marrying a murderer, but neither could she accept Daniel's impulsive proposal. There had to be another way. She harnessed her mule to the small wagon and drove into town, arriving just as the general store opened. Mr. Peterson greeted her with his usual friendliness. Early start today, Miss Reynolds. Your groom arriving at noon, isn't he? Clara nodded politely, unable to explain the truth. She purchased supplies with most of her remaining money: flour, coffee, sugar, ammunition for the old rifle that had belonged to her uncle. If she was to face an uncertain future, she would do so prepared. As she loaded her purchases, she spotted Daniel emerging from the sheriff's office. Their eyes met across the dusty street, and Clara felt a strange flutter in her chest. He tipped his hat but didn't approach, honoring her request for time. Clara was about to drive away when she noticed a commotion at the telegraph office. A rider had arrived, his horse lathered with sweat from hard riding. She watched as he handed a telegram to the operator, who immediately crossed the street to the sheriff's office. Minutes later, both men emerged with Daniel, their expressions grim. Unable to contain her curiosity, Clara tied her mule to the hitching post and approached. Is something wrong? The sheriff, a graying man named Thomas Wilson, regarded her with surprise. Miss Reynolds, I was just about to send Daniel to your place. What is it? She asked, anxiety rising. The stage was robbed 15 miles south, Daniel explained. The driver was shot, passengers robbed. And Mr. McAllister? Clara asked, surprising herself with the concern in her voice despite everything she had learned. Daniel's expression darkened. He wasn't among the passengers. The driver, before he died, said a man matching McAllister's description was waiting in the pass. He joined the bandits in the robbery. Clara felt the blood drain from her face. So it's true, everything you said? I'm afraid so. Daniel rested a hand lightly on her arm. The passengers are being brought in by a cavalry patrol that happened upon the scene. They'll arrive within the hour. Clara nodded numbly. What happens now? We form a posse, the sheriff replied. The bandits were heading west toward the mountains. If we leave now, we might catch them before they disappear into the territory. Daniel turned to Clara, his voice low. My offer still stands. Clara looked into his earnest blue eyes, seeing the integrity there that had been so conspicuously absent from McAllister's letters. Still, marriage was not a decision to be made in haste or desperation. I need more time, she said firmly. Daniel nodded, though disappointment flashed across his features. I understand, but Clara, he hesitated, McAllister knows where you live. If he eludes us, he might come looking for you and what he believes he's entitled to. The implication sent a chill down Clara's spine. I can protect myself. I know you can. A ghost of a smile touched Daniel's lips. Just be careful. As the men prepared to depart, Clara returned to her wagon. The future she had planned now lay in shambles around her. She had wasted precious funds on wedding preparations, and the bank would soon claim her uncle's homestead. Where would she go? What would she do? As she drove back to her cabin, a resolve hardened within her. She would not be a victim not of McAllister's deception, nor of circumstance. Perhaps Daniel's proposal had been impulsive, but was it any more foolish than what she had planned with a man she knew only through letters? By the time she reached the homestead, Clara had formulated a plan. She would not wait helplessly for either McAllister to find her or for Daniel to return with a renewed proposal. She would take control of her own fate. First, she secured the cabin, loading her uncle's rifle and placing it near the door. Then she changed out of her dress into a pair of her uncle's old trousers and a shirt, clothing she used for the heaviest farm work when no one was around to see the impropriety. If McAllister came looking for her, he would not find a helpless woman waiting to be victimized. As sunset approached, Clara heard hoofbeats approaching. She grabbed the rifle, positioning herself by the window. The rider who came into view, however, was not Ethan McAllister nor Daniel Zachary. It was Catherine Henderson, the baker's wife, riding astride rather than side saddle in a most unladylike fashion, her face flushed with exertion. "Clara," she called, dismounting quickly. "Thank goodness you're home." Clara lowered the rifle and stepped onto the porch. "Mrs. Henderson." "What are you doing here?" "It's Daniel," the older woman said, catching her breath. "He's been shot." Clara felt as though the ground had dropped away beneath her feet. "Shot? How? Where is he?" They caught up to the bandits in the mountain pass. There was a gunfight. The sheriff and the others brought him to Doc Wilson's office not 30 minutes ago. Mrs. Henderson clasped Clara's hands. "He's asking for you." Clara didn't hesitate. She saddled her horse, a task that normally took careful minutes, but which she now accomplished in desperate seconds, and followed Mrs. Henderson back to town at a gallop. The doctor's office was a small building adjacent to his home. Clara burst through the door to find the room crowded with men from the posse, their faces grim. Sheriff Wilson stepped forward at her entrance. "Miss Reynolds," he acknowledged. "He's in the back room." "How bad is it?" Clara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The sheriff's expression told her everything before he spoke. "Doc's not optimistic. The bullet caught him in the chest. He's lost a lot of blood." Clara pushed past him, her heart pounding. The back room was dimly lit, smelling of carbolic acid and blood. Daniel lay on the examination table, his shirt removed, a blood-soaked bandage covering his chest. His face was ashen, but his eyes opened when she approached. "Clara," he murmured, his voice weak. "You came." She took his hand, surprised at how cold his skin felt. "Of course I came." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Did you decide? About my proposal?" Clara felt tears gathering in her eyes. This man had tried to protect her, had warned her about McAllister, had risked his life to ensure her safety, and now he lay dying, still thinking of her welfare. "Yes," she whispered. "My answer is yes, Daniel." His fingers tightened slightly around hers. "I wish we had more time." "We will," Clara insisted, refusing to accept what the doctor and sheriff clearly believed. "You're going to recover, and we'll have all the time in the world." Dr. Wilson entered the room, his expression softening when he saw Clara. "Miss Reynolds, I need to examine the deputy now." Clara nodded, but Daniel didn't release her hand. "Stay," he requested. The doctor hesitated, then nodded. "Very well, but please step back while I work." Clara retreated to the corner, watching as the doctor removed the bandage and examined the wound. The bullet had entered just below Daniel's right shoulder, dangerously close to his heart. The doctor probed the wound, causing Daniel to grimace in pain. "The bullet's still in there," Dr. Wilson murmured. "I need to remove it before infection sets in, but he's very weak." "Do what you must," Clara said firmly. "I'll help however I can." The next hours were the most harrowing of Clara's life. She assisted the doctor as he removed the bullet, holding instruments, wiping blood, and whispering encouragement to Daniel when the pain became too intense. By midnight, the bullet lay in a metal dish, and Daniel had fallen into an exhausted sleep. "You should rest," the doctor told Clara, washing blood from his hands. "There's nothing more to be done tonight. Either he'll make it through until morning or he won't." Clara shook her head. "I'm staying." The doctor didn't argue. He provided her with a chair, which she pulled close to Daniel's side. taking his hand in hers once more. As the night deepened, Clara found herself praying for the first time since her parents had died of influenza 5 years earlier. She had come west seeking a new beginning, only to face one hardship after another. Now, just when she had found someone who might truly care for her, fate threatened to take him away as well. "You can't die," she whispered to Daniel's unconscious form. "I won't allow it." The hours crept by. Sometime near dawn, Clara dozed off, her head resting on the edge of the examination table, her hand still holding Daniel's. She awoke to the sensation of fingers gently stroking her hair. She lifted her head, blinking in confusion, to find Daniel watching her with tired but alert eyes. "Good morning," he said, his voice raspy but stronger than it had been the night before. "Daniel," Clara straightened, hardly daring to believe what she was seeing. "How do you feel?" "Like I've been trampled by a herd of buffalo," he admitted with a weak smile, "but I'm still here." Dr. Wilson entered, surprise evident in his expression as he examined Daniel. "Well, Deputy, you're tougher than I gave you credit for. The fever's broken and the wound looks cleaner this morning." "Does that mean he'll recover?" Clara asked, hardly daring to hope. The doctor nodded cautiously. "If we can prevent infection, I believe he has a fighting chance. He'll need careful nursing, though." "I'll do it," Clara said without hesitation. "I can take him to my cabin once he's strong enough to be moved." Daniel's eyebrows rose slightly. "That would cause quite a scandal, Miss Reynolds." Clara felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I did accept your proposal, Deputy Zachary, unless you've changed your mind." A slow smile spread across Daniel's face. "Not a chance." Sheriff Wilson, who had entered during the exchange, cleared his throat. "If you two are determined to marry, I can fetch Pastor Williams. No need to wait if you're sure." Clara and Daniel exchanged a look. It was madness they barely knew each other, and he was gravely wounded. Yet somehow, Clara felt more certain about this decision than she had about anything in years. "Yes," she said, "send for the pastor." An hour later, with Daniel propped up on pillows and Clara still wearing her uncle's trousers and shirt, Pastor Williams performed a simple ceremony in the doctor's back room. Sheriff Wilson and Mrs. Henderson served as witnesses, their expressions a mixture of concern and cautious joy. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the pastor declared, closing his Bible. "May God bless this union, unusual as its circumstances may be." Daniel reached for Clara's hand, his grip weak but determined. "I promise I'll be a good husband to you, Clara Zachary." The name sounded strange to her ears, but not unpleasantly so. "And I'll be a good wife to you, Daniel. Now focus on healing." As the small group of well-wishers departed, Dr. Wilson pulled Clara aside. "He's still not out of danger." "The next few days will be critical." Clara nodded her understanding. "When can I take him home? If he continues to improve, perhaps in 3 or 4 days, he'll need weeks of recovery after that." "I'll care for him," Clara promised, "whatever it takes." The doctor studied her with newfound respect. "You're a remarkable woman, Mrs. Zachary. The deputy is fortunate indeed." For the next 3 days, Clara barely left Daniel's side. She sponged his brow when fever threatened to return, changed his bandages under the doctor's supervision, and coaxed him to eat broth and bread to rebuild his strength. In the quiet hours, they talked, learning about each other in a way they never had before. She discovered that Daniel had come west from Pennsylvania after the Civil War, seeking a fresh start like so many others. He had worked as a ranch hand before becoming a deputy, drawn to the law because he believed in justice. She told him about her life in St. Louis, her parents' deaths, and her decision to claim her uncle's property after his passing. "I never thought I'd marry a lawman," she admitted on the 3rd evening as she helped him take a few sips of water. "And I never thought I'd propose to a woman after knowing her less than a year, with most of our conversations taking place across a general store counter." Daniel replied with a weak laugh that turned into a grimace of pain. Clara adjusted his pillows. "We've certainly done things backwards." "Marriage first, courtship after." Daniel captured her hand. "I meant what I said, Clara. I've admired you since you arrived in Truth or Consequences. Your courage, your determination, I've never met anyone like you." Clara felt a warmth spread through her that had nothing to do with the summer heat. I'm beginning to think your getting shot was a blessing in disguise, Deputy Zachary. It's forced us to spend more time together than we might have otherwise. I could have suggested a picnic instead, Daniel replied dryly. Less painful. Their laughter was interrupted by a commotion outside. Clara moved to the window and peered out, her blood freezing at what she saw. Ethan McAllister was riding down the main street, accompanied by two rough-looking men. They reined in their horses in front of the sheriff's office. Daniel, she whispered urgently. McAllister is here in town. Daniel attempted to sit up, wincing in pain. Get the sheriff. Clara ran to the front of the doctor's office, finding Sheriff Wilson already crossing the street toward the newcomers, his hand resting on his holstered gun. Miss Reynolds misses. Zachary, get back inside, he ordered when he spotted her. Clara retreated but watched through the window as the sheriff confronted McAllister. She couldn't hear what was said, but she saw McAllister's expression change from confidence to wariness as the conversation progressed. After several tense minutes, the sheriff pointed toward the town limits in a clear dismissal. To Clara's relief, McAllister and his companions turned their horses and rode away. She hurried back to Daniel's room. The sheriff sent them away, she reported. Daniel's expression remained grave. They'll be back. McAllister isn't the type to give up easily, especially now that he knows I'm injured. What can we do? Clara asked, fear gripping her heart. We need to get you somewhere safe until I'm able to protect you properly. Daniel's voice strengthened with determination. Help me up. We're leaving town. That's madness, Clara protested. You can barely sit up, let alone ride. We don't have a choice. Daniel's eyes met hers, his resolve evident. McAllister knows I spoiled his plans. He'll come for me and for you. We need to get to Fort Selden. It's 2 days' ride, but we'll be safe there. Clara knew he was right. Truth or consequences was too small, its law enforcement too limited with Daniel incapacitated. Fort Selden, with its military garrison, would offer protection they couldn't find here. I'll make arrangements, she said, already planning. Can you hold on until nightfall? It would be safer to leave under cover of darkness. Daniel nodded grimly. I'll manage. Clara spent the rest of the day in frantic preparation. She explained the situation to Dr. Wilson, who reluctantly agreed that Daniel might be safer at the fort, where a military surgeon could continue his treatment. She arranged for a wagon, padded with blankets to make Daniel's journey as comfortable as possible. Sheriff Wilson provided them with extra ammunition and agreed to create a diversion if necessary to ensure their escape. As dusk fell, Clara helped Daniel dress, each movement clearly causing him immense pain, though he refused to complain. By the time she helped him into the wagon, his face was ashen and sweat beaded his forehead despite the cool evening air. We don't have to do this, she whispered, doubt creeping in. Perhaps the sheriff can handle McAllister. Daniel shook his head. McAllister is smart and ruthless. He has at least 2 men with him, maybe more. Tom can't protect you alone. Sheriff Wilson approached as Clara settled Daniel among the blankets. I checked the road. No sign of McAllister or his men, but that doesn't mean they aren't watching. Follow the river south until you reach the Cottonwood Grove, then take the old military trail east. It's longer but less traveled. Clara climbed onto the driver's seat, her uncle's rifle resting beside her. Thank you for everything, Sheriff. The older man tipped his hat. Take care of our deputy, Mrs. Zachary, and of yourself. With a flick of the reins, Clara set the horses in motion. They left town without incident, the wagon wheels creaking softly in the gathering darkness. Daniel lay silent in the back, but Clara could hear his labored breathing, evidence of how much the movement pained him. They had traveled perhaps 5 miles when Clara heard hoofbeats approaching from behind. Her heart raced as she slapped the reins, urging the horses to greater speed. Clara, Daniel called weakly. Hand me my gun. She reached for the revolver tucked beside her and passed it back, never slowing the wagon. The hoofbeats grew louder and then a voice called out. Mrs. Zachary, hold up. It was Sheriff Wilson, riding hard to catch them. Clara pulled the horses to a halt, relief flooding through her. What is it? She asked as he drew alongside. McAllister and his men returned, the sheriff reported, breathing hard. They're searching the town, they know you fled, and they're asking about the road to Fort Selden. Clara's momentary relief evaporated. They'll overtake us by morning. Not if you take shelter at the Peterson Ranch, the sheriff suggested. It's just 2 miles east of here. Jacob Peterson is a former Texas Ranger. He'll help you. We can't endanger the Petersons, Daniel protested from the wagon bed. Sheriff Wilson shook his head. Jacob insisted when I told him the situation. He's gathering his ranch hands now. It's your best chance, Daniel. After a moment of hesitation, Daniel nodded. All right. But we'll need to throw them off our trail first. The sheriff had thought of this. Continue south for another mile, then cut east where the creek crosses the road. The water will hide your tracks. With this plan in place, they separated, the sheriff returning to town to monitor McAllister's movements, and Clara driving the wagon according to his instructions. Finding the creek proved challenging in the darkness, but eventually they splashed across and turned east toward the Peterson Ranch. The ranch house appeared as a dark silhouette against the star-filled sky, but as they approached, lanterns flickered to life. Jacob Peterson himself stepped onto the porch, a rifle cradled in his arms. Clara recognized him from town, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a gray streaked beard and the watchful eyes of someone who had seen his share of trouble. Mrs. Zachary, he greeted her solemnly. Sheriff Wilson sent word, bring your husband inside. With the help of 2 ranch hands, Daniel was carefully carried into the house and settled in a bedroom that Mrs. Peterson had hastily prepared. The older woman, a practical soul whose efficiency Clara had always admired, immediately began examining Daniel's wound. You've reopened it with all this moving about, she chided gently. I'll need to clean and rebandage it. While Mrs. Peterson tended to Daniel, Mr. Peterson outlined their situation. My men are watching the approaches to the ranch. McAllister and his gang won't take us by surprise. I didn't mean to bring trouble to your doorstep, Clara apologized. The former Texas Ranger waved away her concerns. Trouble finds its own way in this territory, Mrs. Zachary. Besides, your husband did this community a service by exposing McAllister. We take care of our own in truth or consequences. This simple declaration brought tears to Clara's eyes. For so long, she had felt alone in her struggle to maintain her homestead. Now, she was discovering that she had allies she hadn't fully appreciated. Daniel's condition stabilized under Mrs. Peterson's care, but he remained weak and feverish. Clara spent the night at his bedside, dozing fitfully in a rocking chair. Shortly before dawn, she was awakened by a hand gently shaking her shoulder. Mrs. Zachary, one of the ranch hands whispered. Mr. Peterson says to tell you riders are approaching from the south. Clara rose immediately, her heart pounding. How many? 3, moving slow, trying to be quiet about it. She nodded her understanding. I'll stay with my husband. The young man hesitated. Mr. Peterson says you should know how to use this. He handed her a revolver, smaller than Daniel's but well-maintained. Just in case. Clara accepted the weapon, checking that it was loaded just as her uncle had taught her years ago. Thank you. After the ranch hand departed, Clara woke Daniel, explaining the situation in hushed tones. Despite his weakness, his mind remained sharp. Help me up, he requested. I won't lie here helpless if it comes to a fight. Clara supported him as he sat up, wincing with each movement. You're in no condition to fight, Daniel. Maybe not, he admitted grimly, but I can still shoot. Outside, they heard the soft murmur of voices as Mr. Peterson and his men positioned themselves around the ranch house. The minutes stretched into an eternity of waiting, the pre-dawn silence broken only by Daniel's labored breathing and the occasional creak of the house settling. Then came the unmistakable sound of a rifle being cocked, followed by Mr. Peterson's commanding voice. That's far enough, gentlemen. This is private property. Clara couldn't hear the response, but the tension in the air was palpable. Daniel struggled to his feet, using the bedpost for support. I need to see what's happening. You'll reopen your wound, Clara protested, but nevertheless helped him to the window. Through the glass, they could make out 3 mounted figures at the edge of the yard, facing Mr. Peterson and 4 of his ranch hands. All were armed, a tableau of potential violence frozen in the gray light of approaching dawn. I'm looking for Daniel Zachary and his bride, a voice called out McAllister, Clara realized with a chill. I understand they're sheltering here. Nobody by that name on my property, Mr. Peterson responded evenly. Now I suggest you men move along before this gets unfriendly." McAllister's laugh carried clearly through the morning air. "We're already well past unfriendly, Mr. Peterson. Deputy Zachary cost me a bride and a new start. I aim to repay the debt." Daniel's grip tightened on the window frame. "I need to end this before someone gets hurt." "You'll get yourself killed," Clara argued, though she knew the stubbornness in his expression all too well by now. "Better me than Peterson or his men," Daniel replied grimly. "Help me outside, Clara." Knowing she couldn't dissuade him, Clara supported Daniel as he made his painful way through the house and onto the front porch. Mr. Peterson glanced back in alarm as they appeared. "Get back inside, deputy," he ordered. "This isn't your fight." "That's where you're wrong," Daniel called out, his voice stronger than Clara expected. "This is exactly my fight." McAllister turned his attention to the porch, his face breaking into a predatory smile when he spotted Daniel. He was younger than Clara had expected, perhaps 30, with dark hair and the kind of handsome features that might have charmed a lonely woman through carefully crafted letters. "Deputy Zachary," McAllister greeted him mockingly. "You look terrible, and this must be the lovely bride I was promised." His eyes raked over Clara with calculated insolence. "The only promises that matter are the ones Clara and I made to each other," Daniel replied steadily. "She was never yours, McAllister." McAllister's expression hardened. "She would have been if you hadn't interfered." "I had everything arranged, a new name, a new life. Built on murder and deception," Daniel countered. "How many other women have you deceived? How many have died like that poor widow in Kansas?" A flicker of surprise crossed McAllister's face. "You know about that." "Impressive detective work, deputy." "Surrender now," Daniel said, ignoring the taunt. "You're outnumbered and there's no escape. The army's been alerted. Patrols will be combing the territory for you." McAllister exchanged glances with his companions, a silent communication passing between them. For a moment, Clara dared to hope they might retreat, recognizing the hopelessness of their position. Instead, McAllister drew his gun with lightning speed, firing directly at Daniel. Time seemed to slow as Clara acted on instinct, pushing Daniel aside with all her strength. She felt a searing pain across her upper arm as the bullet grazed her, but Daniel was safe, stumbling back against the porch railing. The yard erupted in gunfire. Mr. Peterson and his men returned fire immediately, forcing McAllister and his companions to seek cover behind their horses. Clara dropped to the porch floor, pulling Daniel down beside her as bullets splintered the wood around them. "You're hit," Daniel gasped, noticing the blood soaking through her sleeve. "It's nothing," Clara assured him, though the wound burned like fire. "Just a graze." The exchange of gunfire continued for what seemed like hours, but was likely only minutes. Then Clara heard a cry of pain that wasn't from the ranch house defenders. One of McAllister's men slumped forward in his saddle, then toppled to the ground. "Retreat." McAllister shouted to his remaining companion. They mounted their horses and galloped away, firing wildly over their shoulders as they fled. Mr. Peterson and two ranch hands immediately gave chase, while the others checked on the fallen outlaw. Clara helped Daniel to his feet, both of them trembling from the intensity of the confrontation. "Are you truly all right?" Daniel asked, his eyes fixed on her bloodied arm. "I'll live," Clara replied, attempting a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "As will you, thanks to Mr. Peterson." Mrs. Peterson bustled onto the porch, clucking with concern when she saw Clara's injury. "Inside, both of you. Let me tend to that wound before infection sets in." By midday, Mr. Peterson and his men had returned, grim satisfaction evident in their expressions. "McAllister won't be troubling anyone again," the former Texas Ranger reported as he cleaned his rifle. "His partner got away, but with a wound that'll slow him down enough for the army to find him." Clara, her arm freshly bandaged, exchanged a look with Daniel. "You killed him," Peterson nodded. "He didn't give us much choice. Turned and fired when we cornered him in the Box Canyon south of here. I've sent one of my men to inform Sheriff Wilson." Clara felt a complex mix of emotions: relief that the threat was eliminated, regret for the violence, and lingering shock from the entire ordeal. Daniel reached for her hand as if sensing her turmoil. "It's over," he said softly. "We're safe now." The next few weeks passed in a blur of recovery. Daniel's wound gradually healed under Mrs. Peterson's careful attention, and Clara's arm mended quickly, leaving only a thin scar as a reminder of their ordeal. Sheriff Wilson visited regularly, bringing news from town and assurances that McAllister's surviving partner had indeed been captured by an army patrol. Clara found herself growing genuinely fond of Daniel as they spent their days in conversation, learning about each other's pasts, hopes, and dreams. What had begun as a marriage of convenience, born from desperation and danger, was blossoming into something deeper and more meaningful. A month after the shootout, Daniel was finally strong enough to travel. They bid farewell to the Petersons, whose kindness had saved their lives, and returned to Clara's homestead. The cabin seemed smaller than Clara remembered and somewhat neglected after her absence, but it was still home. Daniel looked around with interest, seeing it properly for the first time. "It needs work," he observed, noting the sagging porch step and the garden choked with weeds. "But we can make it a good home together." Clara watched him as he limped around the property, already making plans for improvements. This was not the future she had imagined when she placed that advertisement in the matrimonial news, but perhaps it was the future she was meant to have all along. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of gold and crimson, Daniel took her hand. "I've been thinking about what happens next," he said. Clara turned to face him. "What do you mean, our marriage?" he clarified. "It happened under extraordinary circumstances. If you want to have it annulled now that the danger has passed, I would understand." The suggestion took Clara by surprise. "Is that what you want?" Daniel shook his head emphatically. "No. These weeks with you have been the most meaningful of my life. I want a real marriage, Clara, not just one on paper." Relief flooded through her. "I want that too," she admitted softly. "I've come to care for you, Daniel, more than I expected to." His smile was radiant in the fading light. "Then maybe we should do things properly. Court each other, even though we're already married." Clara laughed, a sound of genuine joy. "I'd like that." Daniel leaned forward, hesitating just a moment before closing the distance between them. Their first kiss was gentle, a promise of the life they would build together. As autumn approached, Daniel returned to his duties as deputy, though Sheriff Wilson insisted he take on lighter responsibilities while continuing his recovery. Clara divided her time between the homestead and occasional visits to town, where she began selling preserves and baked goods to supplement their income. Their courtship, unusual as it was given their already married status, became something of a local legend. Daniel would bring her wildflowers from his patrols, or save the ribbon from a package at the general store to tie around a simple gift. Clara would pack special lunches for him, or read aloud in the evenings from one of the few books they owned. By winter, they had transformed the cabin, adding a proper bedroom and reinforcing the walls against the cold desert nights. On Christmas Eve, with a small pine tree decorated with paper ornaments Clara had crafted, Daniel presented her with a simple gold band to replace the borrowed ring they had used during their hasty ceremony. "I want to do this right," he said, kneeling despite the lingering stiffness in his wounded shoulder. "Clara Reynolds Zachary, will you continue to be my wife, not because of necessity or danger, but because we choose each other?" Tears gathered in Clara's eyes as she extended her hand. "Yes," she whispered. "1,000 times yes." They renewed their vows on New Year's Day 1884, with Pastor Williams officiating a proper ceremony attended by the friends who had supported them through their ordeal: the Petersons, Sheriff Wilson, Mrs. Henderson, and others from Truth or Consequences. This time, Clara wore the wedding dress she had sewn months earlier for a very different marriage, but her heart was fuller than she could have imagined then. Spring brought new beginnings. The homestead flourished under their joint care, with vegetable gardens expanding and a small orchard planted with saplings Daniel hauled from Santa Fe. Clara discovered she was expecting their first child, news that filled them both with wonder and anticipation. "I never thought I'd have a family of my own," Daniel confessed one evening as they sat on their rebuilt porch, his hand resting gently on her still flat stomach. "After the war, I thought that part of life was closed to me." Clara covered his hand with hers. "Life has a way of surprising us." A year ago, I was placing an advertisement for a husband out of desperation. I couldn't have imagined finding love instead. Daniel pulled her close, his arms strong and secure around her. Do you ever think about McAllister, about what might have happened if I hadn't received that telegram? Clara shuddered slightly. Sometimes. But then I remember that his deception led me to you, and I can't regret how things unfolded, terrible as parts of it were. They fell silent, watching as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. Their journey had begun with danger and uncertainty, but had led to a love neither had expected to find. In the vastness of the New Mexico territory, with its harsh beauty and unforgiving nature, they had carved out a life together, a life built on trust, respect, and a deep affection that grew stronger with each passing day. As summer returned to truth or consequences, Clara gave birth to a son they named Thomas, after Sheriff Wilson, who had stood by them through their ordeal. The baby had Daniel's blue eyes and Clara's determined spirit, crying lustily from his first breath. "He's perfect," Daniel whispered, cradling his son with a tenderness that brought tears to Clara's eyes. "Just like his mother." Clara watched her husband and child, overwhelmed by the fullness of her heart. The path that had led her here had been marked by deception and danger, but had ultimately guided her to where she was meant to be all along. The town grew and prospered around them. Daniel eventually became sheriff when Wilson retired, his reputation for fairness and integrity making him the natural choice. Clara's preserves became famous throughout the territory, sold in stores as far away as Santa Fe. Their homestead expanded into a proper ranch, with cattle grazing on land that had once seemed too unforgiving to support life. 5 years after their unconventional beginning, Clara sat on their porch watching Daniel teach young Thomas to ride his first pony. Their daughter, Elizabeth, born 2 years after her brother, played nearby, arranging pebbles in careful patterns on the steps. "Mama," Thomas called out proudly. "Look at me, I'm a real cowboy now," Clara waved, her heart swelling with pride and love. "I see you, sweetheart." "You're doing wonderfully." Daniel looked up, catching her eye with a smile that still made her pulse quicken after all these years. In that moment, Clara was struck by how completely her life had transformed from the desperate loneliness that had driven her to advertise for a husband. The mail-order husband she had expected had been a murderer seeking to exploit her vulnerability. Instead, fate had brought her a man of honor, a partnership built on mutual respect, and a love that had deepened with each challenge they overcame together. As the desert sunset painted the sky in brilliant hues of orange and purple, Clara offered a silent prayer of gratitude. For the telegram that had warned of danger, for the courage that had carried them through, and for the unexpected love that had blossomed in the unforgiving soil of truth or consequences, New Mexico. In the gathering twilight, Daniel joined her on the porch, wrapping an arm around her shoulders as they watched their children play in the yard that had once been the scene of violence and fear. "Happy?" he asked simply, his voice still carrying the power to warm her from within. Clara leaned against him, savoring the solid strength of the husband she had chosen not out of desperation or necessity, but out of love. "More than I ever thought possible," she replied, and knew with absolute certainty that it was true.